Hello and welcome to this episode of Trader Talk TV. Today I am delighted to be joined by Umberto Torrielli, who is co-founder and chief strategy officer of SilverBullet. Welcome, Umberto.
Hi, good to see you again.
You too. Today we're talking about contextual targeting, specifically contextual intelligence and how it can be fueled by first-party data. So without further ado, let's kick off. And what I'd like to know, first of all, is where are we at with contextual as it currently sits? What does the contextual landscape look like at the moment?
So today the landscape is comprised of two or three major players really that are focused, as they always have been, on reading and understanding text, and then providing contextual targeting and brand safety around text elements. And so the way that works and the way that looks today is you have the players in market that are looking at predominantly what is a website content, and looking through that text within a website content, and in essence scoring that text and pulling out keywords from the content into their engine. And then they're allowing users to create context and segments in the UI or picked directly from within a DSP. And then those are pushed directly to a DSP in what is a pre-bid environment, obviously, with the idea that prior to a bid being made on inventory, the solution will then say whether or not the DSP should make a bid or not, whether it matches that context in that segment or whether or not it's brand safe or brand suitable. Now, I think the issues with that today is that doesn't suffice, and I think we come across it fairly often because we see in the press, and I'm sure you've come across this all the time, that a majority of publishers and news sites are being blacklisted. There's a lot of obviously toxic content out there today that is also being flagged up, as well as the fact that certain keywords can immediately signal kind of blacklisting when perhaps they shouldn't. And the example that we like to think of fairly often today, unfortunately or fortunately, is around coronavirus. So as we know, coronavirus as a keyword and as a topic is obviously deemed brand unsafe for the most part, because anything related to coronavirus typically refers to, fortunately, death rates, disease, virus, and other terminology that is not necessarily terminology a brand wants to be associated with. But the issue with just looking at that keyword in a silo is that oftentimes we come across articles that are actually quite uplifting around that may have the keyword coronavirus in them, but actually talk about what a business is doing at a local level to support elderly folk that can't go shopping, or perhaps what a business is doing from a charitable perspective to help support the research of a vaccine. And so when you look at coronavirus in a silo, of course, it has a negative connotation, and the understanding that the existing technology will likely block that content. But the reality is that there's quite a bit of content that surrounds that topic and other topics like it that would normally be deemed unsafe when you're just looking at the keyword, that actually are quite positive and may want to have an association with the brand. So I think that's where we are today with regards to the existing solutions, really solutions that focus entirely on keywords or predominantly on keywords and text.
And the limitations of that, as you just said, have really come to the fore since during the pandemic, where everyone is so reliant on keywords and block lists and suppression lists. And actually there's a lot more that can be done with contextual. But it seems that when people think of contextual, they think of contextual 5-10 years ago. And actually, as you're going to show us, there's a lot more that can be done with contextual that goes just beyond keywords. So where does that start? What does that look like?
Sure. So I think what we've strived to do, at least on our end, in developing our platform, is look at a number of other different signals on a particular page or within specific content. The idea is that, as you were just saying, and as I mentioned earlier, looking at keywords alone just doesn't suffice anymore. It worked for the longest time, but there's so much more we can be doing. And so when you start to look at using modern techniques like natural language processing and the evolution of what is possible with machine learning today, understanding the semantic, performing semantic analysis and performing sentiment analysis on content, as well as using other signals on the page, so that go beyond text, looking at video signals, looking at audio signals, you can really start to draw the picture of really what the true meaning and sentiment of a particular piece of content really is. And that doesn't just apply to text, but also from video content as well, which, as we know, still commands the highest CPM in market, is still kind of the most premium type of inventory. But yet the solutions in market today don't really consider video, or at least consider video in a way that relies on actual understanding of the video itself. And I'll explain more about that when I draw it out.
And do you think that advertisers have been using third-party data for so long because they can, because it's there, and actually it has a lot of limitations in terms of accuracy of targeting, and there's a lot more that context can do that basically the industry needs re-educating what that looks like.
So absolutely. I think, third-party data had its time. I think, for the most part, especially in the US, it was fairly useful as a tool for marketers because the volume and the volume alone meant that you could test a lot of different data sources, third-party data sources, and see what worked for you as a brand. Unfortunately, I think today, as we know, third-party data has lost a bit of luster in terms of, definitely in terms of the volume available across Europe and ex-US due to GDPR, and obviously now in the US with CCPA. But likewise, the quality of that inventory, of that third-party data inventory, again, is very difficult to trace. So while some third-party data is certainly valuable, for the most part, what we've sought to do and replicate with contextual intelligence is the idea that you can truly kind of replicate and understand what the user intent is based on the content that they're reading. And so by using contextual intelligence and therefore context as a proxy, so to speak, for some of the things that you might have wanted to do with third-party data, you can really get some true performance and some really accurate brand placements with contextual.
Interesting. So map out for us kind of what the next stage, the next evolution of context looks like. You mentioned video and audio earlier. I'm fascinated to see kind of how that plays into the wider contextual conversation.
Sure. So I think going back to what you just mentioned there, one of the things that we've sought to do with 4D really is, as I mentioned as well, is look at content and signals that go beyond just what's on the page in terms of text. So what we'll also do is look at any kind of video signals that exist on the page. We'll also look at audio signals that are on the page. So any sort of audio signals, video signals are taken into consideration when we look at a particular piece of content. Further to that, we've started to do, this is based on our DNA really, and what SilverBullet has been built on over the past 4 years, is the ability to ingest first-party data into the platform. So as we were just saying, third-party data has had its place and its time, but first-party data has always been the most valuable type of data, as we well know, and that's just increasing, right? First-party data is more and more valuable, especially when you look at the kind of the downfall or the deprecation of the third-party cookie. As we've seen recently in the press, Apple kind of enforcing now that IDFAs need to be opt-in. And so all these various industry movements, so to speak, are making it so that first-party data is infinitely more valuable every single day that goes by. So what we've done is we've created the ability to ingest first-party data, audience data into 4D to draw out contextual intelligence, which is even more important than looking just at the content on a particular page. And the way that looks, if I draw this out, is we look at first-party data sources. And in our case, we look at data technology as a first-party data source. And data technology for SilverBullet always has been either a DMP, which, as we know, are increasingly under fire, but they still have their time and place as well. CDP, which is obviously the shiny kind of new, not so new anymore, but the shiny new toolkit in the arsenal, as well as anything like an ad server or an ad server or a DSP, which contains obviously campaign-based data. So we look at these first-party data sources, and we can ingest those first-party data sources into the platform. Now, the one thing to note is that at no point in time, and I kind of like to draw this little no sign, do we ingest any IDs into the platform? Because of course, 4D has been built around the premise of being a completely cookieless and ID-less platform by design. And so once we've brought in either a first-party data source or we've read a signal on a page, what we can then do is basically score that within our engine. So that's a little engine there. I'll delete these little lines around here. And so once you've scored that first-party data, or again, the signals that we're receiving from pages and requests from the DSP, we're then able to do some really, really interesting stuff around the types of analytics and therefore the tools and visualizations that we offer users of the platform in order to really, truly understand and pull out contextual intelligence from those data sources. So what that looks like is we can do a couple of different things. And I'm not going to draw them all because, I'm not a designer, and also it would probably take up too much time here. But
this is the best ad tech art we've ever had. So, carry on.
One of the things we can do is, for example, draw what is typically called a Parliament chart. Now, a Parliament chart, no politics involved here, is a chart where basically you can start to look at the share of voice, if you will, of, in our case, the type of content and context that users find themselves in, okay? And why that's important is if you think about ingesting, for example, campaign data into the platform, we'll be able to tell you as an end user that, for example, auto content, let's keep it very high level, although we can obviously go much more granular in terms of the types of topics we can pull up. But let's say auto content is the content that has performed best for that particular type of campaign, or indeed for that audience that we've ingested from a first-party data source. So converters, people that have performed specific action, any type of audience you can create within a DMP, a CDP, or indeed at a campaign level, we can ingest and highlight into this platform. So once we've shown you that auto, or again, indeed, a much more granular topic is what has performed best from a contextual perspective, you can then create a context based on that, right? So you can go out and you can now say, okay, great, I want to create a context based on that particular context or piece of information. Further to that, we can, again, there's several different reports, and I unfortunately can't draw them all, but what we can do is we can start to show you kind of based on bubbles, right? Let's call them bubbles. The kind of relevancy of specific topics with a particular audience and how that resonates. So we can show you not only kind of the size of a particular, the size of a bubble, which will show you the relevancy in the index, if you will, against a particular audience or against particular campaign data. But that also allows you to then, from within these screens themselves, you can actually start to target specific topics. So you can create a context directly from these topics or block, indeed, certain keywords from a brand safety or brand suitability perspective. So that's another way to do it. Or the last bit I'll show here is just the fact that we can pull in something that we call kind of our related contexts. So those are, let's call them our taxonomy of contexts. We have over 400. They're actually mapped out against the IAB 2.0 taxonomy. And so we can say, the audience, for example, that you've ingested from your DMP. So again, let's say people that have come to your website 14 times in the last month and that purchased your products more than 3 times, typically index highly against these types of related contexts. And those related contexts can be anything from environment to auto to travel to, more specifically, travel in the Caribbean to, all the types of contexts that go very, very granular, similar to what you may have been used to when you look at third-party data sources. Again, we've tried to replicate kind of the promise of third-party data in the early days of the heyday of third-party data and the heyday of the DMP with contextual intelligence. So that's kind of the idea behind ingesting first-party data. From there, then, is we can also then layer in what we call dimensions. And so dimensions, hence the name 4D, is our way of, again, replicating the idea of a marketplace. So everyone is familiar with third-party data marketplaces. What we've tried to do is build a contextual marketplace. And I'm happy to say that we've partnered with some amazing folks. The example that we're going to market with today is a company called FactMata. So FactMata have developed an amazing algorithm that can, in essence, detect, I believe, over 9 signals around whether or not content contains any sort of racist hints, any sort of toxic content, hate speech, political bias, whether if it's clickbait, fake news, I mean, you name it, right? It's very specialist technology. And what we're doing with FactMata is we're allowing users to layer that on, if you will, as a dimension, as a further signal to promote brand safety and brand suitability. Super
and is
topical.
it text content or video and audio as well?
So at the moment, with FactMata specifically, we're able to, or rather, they're able to, through 4D, block any sort of text content. So FactMata is a text dimension, but through our own technology and our own brand safety categories, we can also support video and programmatic audio.
Right, interesting. And what are the conversations that you're having with marketers around this? And how are you, at what stage are marketers at where they are understanding the new potential of the contextual conversation and how they can feed and ingest their own first-party data into it? And I ask because obviously we talk a lot about first-party data from the publisher perspective, but actually there's a massive opportunity here for brands as well. How can they ace the use of their first-party data and feed it into this kind of contextual level of targeting?
It's a really good question. So, interestingly, we've, as you can imagine, had quite a number of conversations over the past few weeks as we've kind of soft launched and now launched the product officially. And I think most interestingly, we've had a conversation with, I believe, the largest CPG company globally, or at least in terms of spend. And one of the things that came out of that conversation and their interest, therefore, in kind of trying out 4D and using it as part of their kind of technology stack, is the fact that they have a mandate to basically leverage first-party data in over 60% of programmatic campaigns. That's kind of their mandate for, I believe, next year. And obviously that's quite difficult, especially if you're a CPG company, because typically, as we know, CPG or FMCG companies don't necessarily have the most volume in terms of first-party data. But also, it's one thing to create an audience in a DMP and push to programmatic. But as we've been saying all along, it's going to become more and more difficult over the next few years as the third-party cookie deprecates and as IDs become more and more difficult to target. And so, what 4D allows a prospect such as the CPG brand I mentioned to do is use first-party data to inform contextual intelligence and contextual targeting downstream into an execution platform like a DSP, which ticks all the boxes in terms of using first-party data at 60% or plus in programmatic, because you're taking first-party data signals, extracting out intelligence, and then again applying those into contextual, which is kind of a new way of thinking about it.
Interesting. That's a great example. Obviously, CPGs, as you say, do not tend to have their own first-party data because they've worked forever with retailers, and they don't have that information. The retailers have it. So it's fast, and we're seeing a lot of brands at the moment try to master that and try to understand how they can create a direct consumer relationship, and this obviously feeds very well into that. Like it's a challenge for them to try and understand how they can do that, but here's the opportunity, right? If they can finally master and understand their consumers better, this feeds into how they can target them better and ultimately sell more product.
That's it. That's the goal. That's the goal, and of course, it will take measurement of outcomes to ensure that we're able to support that process. But in our early benchmarks and the campaigns that we've been running, or that have been powered by 4D, I should say, we've seen some really, really promising results, which again, I'd like to say is magic. It's just a case of applying, we know first party data works really, really well. And it's a case of applying first party data, downstream. And I think where and why we've built the platform the way we have, again, supporting kind of the legacy and the DNA of what is SilverBullet, is around this concept of being able to ingest first-party data from any source. So, we, as you know, as SilverBullet, we're completely tech agnostic, partner agnostic. We work across all the major brands, and we've brought that through and carried that forward with 4D. So, indeed, we can ingest data from any of the major DMP or CDP partners, any of the major ad servers, and again, we can then deploy that into any of the programmatic stacks where we have integrations, of course. And so what that really means is that, in essence, 4D is open for business with any client, really. And hopefully we can prove that journey out as we go.
And what markets are you operating in?
So it's global product. I would say the limitations at the moment are on westernized languages, because obviously the foundation of all this is the language, indeed. So we support all major westernized languages. We're looking at expanding beyond, but at the moment that's kind of what we're focusing on. In terms of our, where we operate, of course, the concept of offices is quite different nowadays. Clearly, we like to think of ourselves as having a distributed workforce. So really, we have offices in the major metros that we've always had. So UK, Italy, and Germany, and so on. With the US coming later this year, but really we're a distributed workforce, and we can kind of support business globally.
Interesting, amazing. And so what's next for 4D? Kind of what stage are you at now? Are you just going on and talking to potential clients and kind of getting actual use cases for it?
Yeah, so at this point we are at a stage where we've kind of officially launched, or soft launched about 3 to 4 weeks ago, launched in earnest last week. We have campaigns running through the platform now. We have partnerships that are being kind of created now with agencies, holding groups, partners, clients, etc. And we have lots of really, really interesting stuff that we're building today. In fact, if I could just draw something, I can highlight some of the work that we're doing and some of the features that are coming to the platform. So,
right.
One of the other ideas behind the dimensions, for example, is that we want to start looking at where we have real-time integrations with the DSPs, is bringing other signals like weather, which has been done in the past, but weather, location data, and several other types of dimensional layers which can be layered in, including, for example, the page type. So that's one where we can look at understanding using machine learning whether or not potentially where an inventory slot is, if it's a homepage versus a news section versus a sports section. Again, really critical because to date it's very difficult to ensure that you as a brand are running only on premium estate, or for example, indeed that you're not running on news content or UCG content. So with a page type dimension, for example, which actually is already available now, we can, and it's been developed by us internally, we can ensure that, that we can at least understand at a base level what type of content or section, if you will, of a website a brand might be associated with. But further to that, and I think what's even more exciting, and I'll just draw this little arrow here to complete the picture, is that as we've been saying along, we're not only looking at being able to indeed place a brand within a website and ensure that that content is the content that a brand wants to be in, of course, but also that it's brand suitable. But we believe strongly that in order to really have or give the ability rather to brands to control the messaging around it and where it is seen, it has to be wherever brand can be seen by consumer. And so we've gone beyond just working in a text environment, but also we've developed our own computer vision, which allows us to again score video and extract out entities and topics from a video, analyzing frame by frame a video itself, so that if a video does not have for example, a speech track, or if there's no audio indeed on a video, we can still work with that video content, no problem. As well as within programmatic audio, which is increasingly becoming obviously important with the various players like Spotify. So what we're looking to do is, I shouldn't say looking to do, we can already support today, is this kind of idea of an omni-channel contextual solution where you create a context once within the platform. Whether you're starting with your typical keywords, keyword lists, as other players allow you to do, or whether you're starting from a first-party data source, you can then run all this really cool intelligence on those data sources. You can then layer in all these really important dimensional partners like Factmata. Which again, I can't stress it enough. Today, if you think about what's happened in July with some of the big brands pulling out of Facebook spends, because of the kind of the inability of Facebook and a few other social environments to be clear about kind of what constitutes hate speech or racism, we can ensure that a brand is protected from those types of signals in the open web, which is pretty incredible. And so you've done all that, and then you can then deploy that context across all channels. And what that leaves you with really is this idea of first-party informed contextual targeting and brand suitability, which I think is paramount in today's environment.
So that's fascinating, right? So what you've actually got is you've got the way that you're using context isn't just from the, your basic hygiene factors almost, which is, okay, this is my standard block list. These are the keywords I won't go near. But actually you can say, this is the context, what I want to achieve for this particular campaign, this particular audience. And I can not just apply that in a textual basis, but actually in a video and an audio-visual basis as well, and apply the same context across everything. And actually, when you think of context, you wouldn't, an advertiser would previously never have thought about context when it comes to video and audio. So it's exciting to be able to kind of bring all them into one place and have the same strategy almost across all three.
That's exactly right. I mean, you've nailed it. I mean, I think, ultimately what we believe, as I mentioned earlier, and as you just alluded to, is that a brand should be safe or feel at least that they're in the right environment for that particular campaign, product, whatever it is, regardless of where they're going to be seen by a person. And there's nothing more important than creating efficiencies around not having to create protection in 65 different environments. So you can just do it once. But B, also really understand what is that perfect moment and perfect context to communicate and to ensure that your brand is placed. And so when you consider, as I said, signals, all the signals on the page, as well as other dimensions like weather, so whether it's sunny out, whether it's 25 degrees or whatnot, and ensuring that the content is completely brand safe and brand suitable, you combine all those factors together and you're across all channels, and you're really giving a really powerful tool, I think, to marketers. And we haven't even talked about publisher use cases, but there are a whole slew of those as well from 4D. 4D, it was built as a service layer, really. So it's been architected as a service, and by service I mean an API-based service that has its front end for marketers that we've been talking about today, but it also allows publishers to score all of their content, calling our service, so that they can score all of their generated UCG content or published content, whether it's video or syndicated content or articles and text, and provide therefore a buying interface, contextual buying interface for advertisers directly, to ensure that they're buying accurate contextual inventory across their own websites, therefore avoiding or if you will, cutting out some of those block lists and blacklists, as well as ensuring that an advertiser feels safe about running inventory on websites. So we're trying to help a little bit publishers with regards to the fact that some of them might be blacklisted completely, whereas lots of their content might be really, really good. So 4D is also enabling publishers, and we're in conversations with quite a few publishers to help power kind of this next generation of advertising.
Brilliant. And you refer to it as next generation of advertising, which is a great way of referring to it. We talk a lot about, with the integration of the third-party cookie, the need to future-proof certain solutions, and kind of what are those solutions that will allow advertisers and publishers to be able to future-proof their marketing strategy. Would you consider contextual and especially contextual intelligence fueled by first-party data, as is what we're talking about, and the 4D product within that as one of those future-proof solutions?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think obviously I'm biased clearly, but I think I think contextual is definitely having some sort of a renaissance, if you will. We're not the only company that is looking to evolve their existing contextual solution, or that's looking to enter the fray, so to speak. But I think there's a good reason for that. I mean, ultimately, contextual is the only targeting technology that doesn't actually target people or users. You could start. Obviously, there are other solutions out there, and there are other ways that that companies will mitigate the fact that third-party cookies are deprecating, and there's consortiums, and there's first-party IDs that are fueled by machine learning, and there's the whole there are projects that are being run by various bodies and entities, as I'm sure you're well aware of. But ultimately, I think those are all still going to be, if not band-aids to a solution, but really just they're going to allow technologies to continue to operate in an environment, but they're still going to operate in the same way. I think contextual still, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, is the way forwards, because if you as a person are reading something, there's good reason to believe that you're interested in that article or that content, or that if you're watching a video, you're probably interested in that video. There's very little inference, if you will, and we can't say that deterministic, that if you're reading an article about a car review specifically, that you will buy that car, but certainly it's a very strong indicator that you're at least very interested in that vehicle. Otherwise, you wouldn't be reading that review. So I think, again, third-party data was a good signal of that. And I think contextual, the way it can be done today, especially, and the way it will be done tomorrow, is a very, very strong proxy. And I think in some cases much better than third-party data ever was. There are different schools of thought on probabilistic versus deterministic and so on. I think ultimately, the results speak for themselves, and that's really what matters, right? From a brand perspective, what matters is that is the bottom line, right? And the ROI you're getting on a particular campaign or particular media, or indeed the technology you're investing in. And so, ultimately, results are what matter. And I think what we've seen, at least from these early kind of campaigns that have been powered by 4D, is that the results have been really, really good, really, really good across the board. So we're excited to see where we go with this. We have a really, really cool roadmap, some really, really cool features coming out. I think we're ahead of the curve from what I've seen. Again, biased, but from the competitive research we've done, I think we're ahead of the curve in a number of areas. And I think what's on a roadmap is just going to set us even further ahead. So we're really excited to bring this product to market and see if we can make a difference. Brilliant.
Well, it sounds very exciting. We're excited to hear what's next and how it evolves. And on that note, we will end. But thank you so much, Umberto, for joining us. It's been really fascinating. And this has been Trader Talk.